We just want to have a conversation with Rupert McCammon. He is the Managing Director of African Investments, and he shall be telling us what that conference is about and also just who will be attending that particular conference. Rupert, thank you very much for joining us, and from London there, thank you for joining us, and just tell us about the conference that is slated for October 2022. What do we expect?
Thank you very much, Betty. So the AFSIC Investing in Africa event was set up about 9 years ago and has developed into perhaps Africa's most important investment event. So it aims to bring together companies that are looking to raise finance for reasonably substantial projects in Africa. So whether they're in the financial services sector, maybe the energy sector, agriculture, in fact, in any sector in Africa, bring them to London to meet many of Africa's largest institutional investors. So those are investors that are managing substantial pots of money on behalf of third parties. Perhaps they're private equity funds, they might be listed equity funds, they could be sovereign wealth funds. For instance, the South African the largest move them to making investment transactions. So the whole event is centered around matching companies that are seeking investment with investors that are looking for investment opportunities, specifically in the African continent.
Right. So which kind of, say, investment opportunities exist for the African people, especially the business people that are looking for investments during such conferences?
Sure. So really, you can divide the investment opportunities onto the continent into those that major investors globally will look at, and those might be the investors in that kind of investment opportunity would tend to be larger investors looking to invest sums of a couple of $100,000 for the smallest funds, all the way up to hundreds of millions of dollars. They're looking for companies that are well established, that have a track record, where there's established management team, where they can have a conversation, they can look at the history of the company and see whether there are any good reasons to invest into that company. They do also invest in startups as well. Those are kind of the investment opportunities that the investors who are attending AFSIC are looking at this particular event. But of course, across the continent, in every country in Africa, there are a myriad of investment opportunities focused on the really smaller end of business. So perhaps a mango farmer looking to raise money to expand their acreage, perhaps a solar panel reseller looking to expand their operations wherever they are in Africa. Those kind of investment opportunities are not so well suited to this particular event. However, we've launched a number of digital platforms that we can talk about later, which are really perfect to capture those investment opportunities and to match business leaders across Africa who are looking to raise money with smaller kind of investors. So yeah, the AFSIC Investing in Africa conference is really focused on the major investment opportunities, perhaps investments into Kenya's banks, Kenya's leading agriculture companies, perhaps some of the infrastructure projects, ports and logistics that you have in Kenya, but also across all 54 countries in Africa.
Right. Rupert, this particular conference, this is not the first edition that is happening. Could you just tell us what you have been able to achieve this far?
Yeah, sure. So this is the 9th edition. We were unable to hold the event for a couple of years during COVID for obvious reasons, especially as the main participants in the event are from the African continent, so they were most people were unable to travel during the past year. So what we've done is we have, over the course of 9 years, really established credibility as the major investment event for Africa, to the extent that nowadays what happens is that when we hold the event, a huge number of the investors turn up. We get a whole bunch of what I call deal makers. So these are investment bankers, perhaps stockbroking companies, maybe trading on the Nairobi Stock Exchange, but also in the regional stock exchanges, and also companies. And the whole investment ecostructure and service support companies. So, for instance, lawyers from Kenya might turn up, accountancy companies. We know that we've got the head of Eastern Africa, but Ernst & Young is turning up as an example. And, over the past 8 years, what we found is that bringing together this whole group of people has led to a wealth of investment opportunities being financed. So whether it's a microfinance company raising money, whether it's a energy company being able to connect with a Swiss-based energy investor. So we have all these connections that have been made at the event, which are hopefully leading to new investment decisions being made. And I think we've certainly seen that happen in past editions of APSIC, and it's really evidenced by the support that we now get from, I think we've got sponsorship from 4 of the G5 leading economies in the world. So the American government, the British government, the German, the French, the Dutch, they financially sponsor the event with, I suppose, really evidencing the fact that it was having success at putting together companies in Africa that are looking.
Right. Rupert, so as we now walk into you had the numbers that I spoke about at the start of the conversation. Those are quite some huge numbers, $83 billion coming into Africa just last year. Of course, an uptick from $39 billion in 2020, just to repeat those numbers. What makes Africa so attractive, and even when you look at the economic growth that is happening in Africa, despite all the challenges, there's COVID and many other challenges that Africa faces, what makes Africa attractive?
So, in global terms, interestingly, Africa is not perceived as being an enormously attractive place in which to invest by large numbers of the world's population. Now, that's a narrative that is changing. So while we're seeing increasing investment coming into the continent, it's really off a very low base. And there's a huge way to go for Africa to really attract as much investment as it deserves to do so. So yes, we're seeing increases in investment, but they're not coming quick enough. And, having said that, I really believe that Africa is on the cusp of very rapid growth. And I think when that rapid growth starts becoming evidenced in numbers, then we're going to see a much greater investor appetite for coming into the continent, for looking at investment opportunities. Because, when you look at the rest of the world has now, to a large extent, emerged from a developing perspective and moved into more developed countries. If we look back 30, 40 years ago, many parts of Asia, including China, for instance, had huge levels of poverty and were relatively poor. And that region of the world has seen great growth over the last 30, 40 years. I'm absolutely convinced that it's now Africa's turn to see that growth, and it'll be supported by the young population in Africa. And that's one of the principal drivers and one of the principal reasons why Africa is going to do so well over the next 50 years, is that we have this huge wealth of young population who are going to be digitally literate. They're going to be able to participate in the world economy in a way that their grandparents and parents were unable to, because there was no internet, there was no access to the global economy. And I think this is going to drive Africa's emergence over the course of the next 50 years. I think we can really see quite a lot of exciting economic growth coming, but the investment at the moment is not as high as it should be.
Thank you very much, Rupert. We shall be joining you in just
1 minute break.
Do stand by. We shall be coming back to you. We want to take a quick break here on BizCheck. When we come back, this conversation about attracting investments to Africa with Rupert McCammon, the Managing Director of African Investments, continues. Do stay with Channel One. This is KBC Channel 1 and you are watching BizCheck. My name is Betty Kiptum. In studio, we are having a conversation with Rupert McCammon, who is joining us via Zoom from London. And we are talking about matters investing in Africa. The Investing in Africa conference is happening in October 2022. And we are just seeking an understanding of exactly what will be happening during that conference and what makes Africa tick. Rupert, thank you for staying with us. You were telling us about what just makes Africa very attractive. Could you please keep going on that?
Yeah, sure. So there's Africa's a relatively untapped economy, I suppose. When you look at it, it comprises 54 different countries, each of which has very different characteristics. So when you look at Morocco, Egypt, Kenya, South Africa, the big economies the continent, they're each very different. Most global businesses don't really understand Africa, and they don't understand the opportunities on the continent. But what we do with Africa very closely is we're seeing the emergence of a really a very digital literate youthful class who are going to be driving forward economic growth within the Africa continent in decades to come. So I think traditionally one of the ways in which countries have got richer is through industrialization. It's through the introduction of manufacturing and a large number of people being employed in manufacturing jobs, whether it's in textiles or if you look at China, the whole wealth of industrialization and manufacturing that goes on there. Personally, I think that will happen to a large extent in Africa because the wages are relatively low compared to the rest of the world. But I think the big opportunity for Africa is really the ability for companies that are operating in more expensive parts of the world to outsource jobs to Africa. And indeed, I do that myself in my own companies. I'm in Djibouti, Ethiopia, Botswana, South Africa, and other parts of the continent as well. The reason for that is that the staff are incredibly adaptable, they're digitally literate, but also they're relatively less expensive than the rest of the world. And I think that kind of process, now that we've come through COVID and we've understood that remote working is something that does work in a work environment, I think we're going to see a lot of jobs migrate to Africa, and I think that will generate huge economic growth on the continent in decades to come.
I like that you mentioned the labor market that exists in Africa, because Africa has quite a young workforce that is very much educated, but the economies as they are do not generate enough jobs for them. So I like that you've mentioned that. And is this something that the investors will be looking at during the conference?
It's one of the key considerations that an investor will look at, and it's one of the reasons why Africa is going to outperform the rest of the world economically, in my opinion, over the next 50 years, is because when you look at countries like China, when you look at Japan, Germany, much of the developed world, what you're starting to see is the population is aging very quickly. So the number of young people that have been born is reducing each year as the growth rate of as people have fewer kids, in fact. And what that means is that the tax burden in richer countries is likely to go up, the ability to recruit is likely to decrease, and so the labour market's getting tighter. In fact, we're seeing that with inflation in many of the developed world economies at the moment, with lack of labour. So what is going to happen, undoubtedly, in my opinion, is that a lot of those jobs are going to shift to Africa. The jobs are done on the internet. People in Kenya will be working for companies based in Japan, maybe in America, maybe in Europe, and doing jobs for those companies. They'll be bringing in income into the Kenyan economy that up until the invention of the internet, and really until remote working, just that income was not there. So it's a huge new potential source of income for countries like Kenya. And I think it will drive economic growth in Kenya forward over coming decades. And of course, when people are working remotely for companies, they're learning how those companies operate, and then they can start those same companies in Kenya themselves and become world beaters. And of course, that's what we've seen with countries like China, where they have operated maybe on an outsourced basis for companies that are based in America and Europe, and they've undertaken manufacturing processes for those companies. Now they've actually started being the manufacturing companies themselves and running the company, and no longer working for an American company that operate on their own. I think that's what's going to happen in countries like Kenya. We'll see the jobs migrate to Kenya, and then the businesses start generating in Kenya and grow to the rest.
Yes, that's great. We hope that actually keeps building and opening up more jobs for both Kenyans and just people living in Kenya, really. Let's talk about the technological advancements that are going on within the continent. I mean, Kenya in itself is quite developed technologically, even when you look at the world map. So is this something that is making Africa and Kenya, to be specific, attractive? I mean, you've seen quite a number of tech startups receiving funding. Last year was quite a boom, and we hope that this year will even be better. So how do you see this playing out?
Yeah, undoubtedly. The tech future in Africa is really exciting. There are tech startups across the continent. Kenya is one of the hubs for tech. And people across the world are scouring the continent, including Kenya, look for the next big thing. We've seen some big tech companies coming out of Kenya. We've seen, obviously, in Pesa, but we've also seen tech companies coming out of Nigeria, elsewhere in the continent as well. I mean, tech is the future for really the workforce in Kenya. And I know traditionally it would have been agriculture, for instance, maybe coffee, maybe tea, when you're looking at exports. Flowers, and in Asia it was manufacturing drove economic growth. But I'm convinced that it's the tech world that will drive Kenya's economy forward for the next 30, 40 years. So that means that getting a population that is tech literate is really important. And of course, Africa, funny enough, because it had very poor telecommunication infrastructure prior to the advent of mobile phones, has actually leapfrogged much of the rest of the world. And I mean, I've been off to parts of the Congo where the telephone system is actually better than in the village that I used to live in the UK. And that's all to do with the fact that Africa is double jumping in some elements the old archaic infrastructure that's established in the more developed world. So yeah, big exciting opportunities in tech, but for the whole population. It's really, I suppose the lesson for Kenya is drive out the internet to all the population, so that the population can benefit from the internet and participate in it, and also create new businesses. Because you can create a new tech business from anywhere in the world. You could be in a rural part of Kenya, you could be in Nairobi. It doesn't matter where you are. You can create that business nowadays from wherever, and that's such an exciting opportunity for Kenya.
Rupert, we are talking about all these opportunities that exist and how Africa is placing itself at a place where it's now time for Africa, so to say. How about the challenges? Are there some challenges or things that are slowing down this progress, especially talk about matters like corruption or prudence of use of resources, and also things such as the stability of the political stability in these countries?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of challenges in Africa. The challenges are not unique, and traveling in China, and at that stage, China had lots of challenges. Corruption was still an issue in China, and China's managed to develop very successfully as large problem with corruption and is growing rapidly. But perhaps Africa's biggest is that as a continent, it's an enormous landmass, but it's subdivided into a very large number of countries, each of which is relatively small in global proportions. So, for instance, the entire African continent, which is African countries, is the same size economically as India, which is one country. So as an investor, you have to decide, now, do I want to invest in India where there's one legal system, or do I want to start getting involved in Africa, but, I might invest in Kenya, Rwanda, Uganda, Ethiopia, but then I'm going to have to learn 4 different legal systems, each of which has its own taxation code, each of which has I have to set up a company in each of those places. So, I think one of the key things that has to happen in an African sense is greater integration of the regional economies. Global investors, when they look at investment, don't have such great complexity of investing and having to set up structures everywhere and learn different legal systems. So Kenya is part of the COMESA regional investment area. The COMESA team is actually in Africa, coming to the conference. The head is great, and so I'll spend some time with them looking at ways in which we can trade across Africa. But there are issues, and this complexity of having lots of different countries is important. Corruption's a major issue. If I'm an investor and I have to choose whether to put, as an example, $10 million into a country where corruption is very high, as opposed to putting $10 million into a country where corruption is low and where I know that my investment will be safe, the laws are not going to be changed. I'll be deciding to go to a more stable environment. And it's investors are looking for stability. They want to know that the laws, when they invest in a country, the laws as they are today will be as they are in 5 years' time, in 10 years. When they put a big infrastructure in place and they spend money there, they aren't faced with uncertain changes in legislation and, perhaps their property rights in a country. And we've seen that in many parts of Africa where governments have unilaterally decided that it's not right that foreign investors have this percentage of a business sector, and so the government will unilaterally say, well, company. Foreign investors will not go back to that for a long time.
Rupert, sorry, we had lost you a little bit there. It's good to have you back. You were talking about the challenges that investments in Africa, or just investing in Africa in itself, is facing. Please.
Yeah, so I think, it's the biggest challenge is the fact that the continent is split into 54 different countries, and so each has their own legislation and jurisdiction, and it's complex when you're operating across Africa because of the different jurisdictions. Corruption's an issue. Stability of law is an issue. If you're investing somewhere, you want the law today to be the same as it is in 10 years' time, so you know what your investment needs to make and what returns you're going to make. But in general, these are not challenges that are insurmountable. I think there are, in many areas, progression has been made to reduce the challenges. They're still substantial, but the opportunities are really there right in front of Kenyans, and certainly on the digital side, the ability to now plug into the world economy, to become part of global companies and to be recruited and then to set up tech companies in Kenya. That opportunity is like never before. It's a really exciting one, and one that I know many Kenyans are already taking, but I think many more will take over the next 10 years.
Right, Rupert, so the conference is a few weeks away. What would you say to maybe businesses who are looking to attend such a conference? What would you say to them? How can they reach you? And also, what tools are you using to make it more accessible for business owners?
No, thank you, Betty. That's very kind. So, yeah, the conference is in 2 weeks' time, in just over 2 weeks' time. It's pretty tight for Kenyan companies wanting to come, but our website is AFSIC, afsic.net. You can book online there to attend. Now, we also have a range of free platforms which are designed specifically for Kenyan and other African businesses to promote themselves on. It's all free. So if you go to that same website, you can find those platforms there. They're really exciting. We've just won a major award from one of America's top tech companies. What those platforms do is try to match business, investment and trade opportunities in and across Africa. They're equally useful for the smallest trader in Kenya all the way up to the big companies. We're looking at introducing things like artificial intelligence to make them better, but they're free to use. And you'll get more details on our website. And I know Betty, KBC and AFSIC, we've got a close relationship. We're hoping to grow business into Kenya together, and looking forward to maintaining the dialogue with Kenyan companies and looking to assist Kenyan businesses and individuals.
That is quite a good way to put it there. You're looking to grow Kenyan businesses. I mean, Kenyans are just going into business every other day. I mean, it's interesting that more women are going into entrepreneurship than men, but the funding is largely going to the men, who are fewer in the field. What would you say about that, Rupert?
Well, I think there are big efforts across the world, really, to ensure gender equality and to try and ensure that everybody, regardless of gender, but also race and colour, gets an equal opportunity in today's world. And I know that within our AFSIC event, we have a number of sessions specifically dedicated to promoting female-led businesses and female-led investment funds, and it's really exciting because you're empowering half of the world's population now in a way that historically has never really been achieved. And so just by doing that, you're unlocking so much talent and so much exciting new opportunity, and that in itself will create new jobs. And it's very exciting, but of course a long way to go as well. And we mustn't forget men as well, because lots of men out there with great opportunities, but it really is a matter of making sure that everyone's treated equally, and that's as it should be.
Awesome. So Rupert, as we come to a close of the conversation, what would be your closing remarks, and what are you looking forward to in the next few weeks?
Well, I mean, I think we're looking forward to a really exciting AFSIC event. It's there. We're looking to match some of the big investment opportunities in Kenya with investors. But if you can't attend, get onto our website. Make sure you register onto our digital platform, absolutely free of charge. And we're going to try and help you grow your business in Kenya and do it for free, and see if we can match you with business opportunities and partners and investors across the world. So thank you for the opportunity, Betty.
Thank you, Rupert, and thank you for speaking with us. See you in London.
Looking forward to it.
Awesome. That is Rupert McCammon. He is the Managing Director at African Investments, and we have been talking about investing in Africa, how investors are looking into Africa, what makes Africa tick, and just some of the challenges that Africa is facing as an investment destination. That particular conference takes place on October 10th and 11th in London, and we shall be bringing you the proceedings of that particular event. That's it for BizCheck this particular morning. Do enjoy the rest of your viewing. Kurunzi Mashinani is coming up, and later on Tambrini. My name is Betty Kiptum. Do have yourself a lovely day. Bye-bye.